Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Hateful Eight. The thing about classic Hollywood westerns is when people talk about them, they talk about the gunfights, they talk about the masculinity, but the thing they don't really talk about is what these films really were, which were most of the time kind of morality plays. They were more theatrical, and theatrical I mean in kind of the play theater sense. Then we kind of know westerns now when they took on more of a filmic sense with Sergio Leone and the spaghetti western. Hateful Eight is more like a classic Hollywood kind of morality tale type of western, even done in the 70mm. That's probably plausible that they would have made a movie like this in 70mm, or at least the one I saw. See, I got this. Pretty cool. Most of these morality tales could be more complex, specifically on TV, but most of the time the morals would bring into question things that were going on in modern society and things that they wanted to comment on. Even though it would be set in the West, they'd really be talking about the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, so forth. Hateful Eight takes that tradition and uses a morality tale to talk about our current climate and really how hate can tear us all apart, using references like John Carpenter's The Thing, particularly mixing them together with Western morality tales and making a very ugly, hate-filled film that really makes history look more hate-filled and violent than his other two films. His other two films were violent, certainly. They weren't ugly in their violence. They weren't mean. They were films to course-correct history. The Jews didn't get their revenge on Hitler, so Tarantino gave it to them. Django, instead of the ugly failure of Reconstruction, he decides instead to have Django blow up the plantation. Hateful Eight is the reverse of those films. It's almost like the Jackie Brown to his Pulp Fiction is Hateful Eight to those films, where instead of course-correcting history, he's going, no, history is ugly and bloody and disgusting and mean, and we probably potentially could all destroy each other. Because of our hate and our prejudices will all rip us all apart. It's probably his meanest, darkest, and most difficult movie in a lot of ways, but it also says a lot about our current society in a way. It doesn't dress it up, but also isn't exactly saying it, because certainly it's a Western, but if you're a more careful viewer, you can tell that what he's really saying is how eventually our hate will all rip us all apart. It's kind of like you're looking at the end of The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. Spoilers, I guess. But when Kurt Russell and Childs are looking at each other and waiting to see who is the Thing, in Tarantino's world, they're both the Thing, or neither of them are the Thing, but they'll both kill each other trying to find out. And it's a very dark, hate-filled, mean type of movie. Kurt Russell's character of John Ruth, who's known as the Hangman, most bounty hunters just kill you and bring you back in, but John Ruth, the Hangman, always gets his man and brings them to hang, and he has Daisy Domergue, I think, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. They're stopped on their coach on their way by Samuel L. Jackson's character of Major Warren as he is trying to find passage in a very bad snowstorm. They also pick up Sheriff Mannix, who's the sheriff of Red Rocks, where Daisy will eventually hang, and then go to Minnie's haberdashery, where they meet various other people and are not sure exactly who to trust, including Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, Bruce Dern, and Damon Bashir, and they're not sure what exactly is going on, and eventually have to pit themselves against each other and their prejudices against them, as this is Reconstruction, not liking each other because of the various hatred towards one another that eventually will tear them apart in a bloody rampage. The thing about Tarantino is he never makes the same movie twice, which is great as a film viewer and someone who's seen all his films. He doesn't really repeat himself too often. He does in some ways, but he always tries to say something different with it. This is almost like his big prestige director, kind of old school Hollywood type of movie. I mean, he's doing it in 70mm. To do this in a roadshow shows a big studio epic in a way, which this film kind of is and kind of isn't, but it definitely borrows a lot from the theatrical way that Hollywood used to be. Most Hollywood films is a lot of people talking with great sets and everything. They're not as edit heavy and have as many action sequences. This feels more like theater. There was that table read, and I didn't go to it. I don't live in LA, but I can imagine this being performed on the stage quite well. And Hollywood used to be more based in theater. That's how most people got their entertainment, so that's kind of how they knew how to write stories. Since we've moved away from that and more people are basing how they understand storytelling from comic books and video games and television, obviously that's changed. Whether that's good or bad is up for a debate, but it really doesn't matter. That's just how society is. And Tarantino is very much taking from that old kind of classic Hollywood vibe, but much like Django, where he took a character like Django, who's been beaten down by society and seems to rise up. In most of those films, they get kind of beaten to heck, and then in the end finale, they kind of win, but they're all fucked up or something. In that, he made him kind of like a superhero. He didn't give him that awful part at the end. I mean, look at the actual Django film from the 60s and look at Django Unchained, and there's a huge difference, and there's a difference in what he does with that kind of a story. And I think Hateful Eight does that that as well, in that he's using the morality play, but he's not having any good guys. He mentions how this is very much influenced by Bonanza or the Virginian or the High Caporal, which I've never heard of. And there are these Western TV shows, and they'd always have one where some of the good guys are captured, which would be a long, drawn-out kind of episode, which is interesting that he wanted to make this on 70mm, which was actually introduced to counter television in classic Hollywood. That's why they introduced like Cinerama. This film was produced in Cinerama, so it's interesting that he took the influence of television to bring back 70mm, which was a format which was made to counter the Thing that influenced it, but whatever. What The Thing does is has a very, and Carpenter always had a very pessimistic idea and ideal of humanity and how we'll all tear each other apart. And seeing how we just witch hunt people currently and how it does feel like we're all ready for controversy and to rip something down. I kind of sadly agree with the morals of this film, because I think humanity is very hate-filled and humanity will tear itself apart in a lot of ways. I have a lot of faith in humanity and the public and people in general, but what this is saying is if given the opportunity, we will tear ourselves apart, and that's probably the most likely scenario in a lot of situations. He does it in an entertaining way. I don't think this is as depressing as The Thing. He still makes it a little fun. Tarantino, it always feels like you're at a cool cocktail party, and Tarantino always has that vibe to it, like a party vibe, and that vibe's running throughout it a little bit. But the idea of The Thing, and that they all tear each other apart because they think this person might be the Thing or that person might be the Thing, and they might destroy all of them, and the idea that no one can trust anyone in this is very interesting. I think in some ways the influences that go into this film feel the least dense of any of his film, because he's taking John Carpenter's The Thing, which is apparently, if you worked on this film, the only thing he'd show to people. He's taking these Western TV shows and he's taking Reservoir Dogs. Taking one of his own films feels odd for him, but I like what he does with it. Growing up with Tarantino being this huge influence on film and learning film history through him and reading interviews and going, what's that movie? I'm going to go to Blockbuster and rent it. I've learned a lot about film history from Tarantino, and the interesting thing about that is that as I watch his filmography and as I watch more movies, I feel less like, what is this world? I feel more like, oh, okay, yeah, I know what this is. I know I have the context for this. They do feel a little less challenging and mind expanding than they used to, but it lets me appreciate it in a different context. This isn't me trying to be pretentious, but it's honestly how I've viewed his filmography as I've grown older and my appreciation for film has changed. And watching this film, I can really appreciate what he's doing with it. And just like films like The Oxbow Incident is commenting on mob mentality and the ugliness of that, but this is kind of giving it, in terms of Hollywood, classic Hollywood always had this punishment mentality. You did something bad, you got punished. You killed someone, you're going to jail, you're getting the chair. That was in the ratings code, for fuck's sake. This movie almost just punishes everyone because they're all terrible motherfuckers. It's interesting that he does it in such an old classic Hollywood way, because he's showing that everyone has a certain amount of hate and everyone could just rip each other apart. But I like how he says it with the classic Hollywood thing. I like the Roadshow. I did see the Roadshow. I didn't see the digital release, the wide release, so if that was different in some way, I can't say. But I did get the cool booklet, and there was an intermission and an overture. But the thing that made it most special was Morricone's score. Made this feel epic and big and like an event that it should. Morricone is one of the greatest film composers of all time. Apparently a lot of the cues were actually leftover cues that were not used in The Thing that they put in this that fit perfectly well. The Morricone's scores are just amazing, and this is probably one of my favorite scores, if not my favorite score of 2015. It was just so lush and beautiful and amazing. He emphasized the paranoia. He emphasized how strange it was they're in this situation. He emphasized all the emotions at certain points. It was just beautiful and amazing and reminded me how much I love that composer. And Robert Richardson's cinematography. A lot of people have said, why didn't you use 70mm? Because it's just a bunch of people in one room talking for most of the movie. But most of the movies that use 70mm were actually films where people were just in a bunch of rooms talking. So if you're gonna say, you know, he should have just shown these amazing landscapes the whole time, that wasn't the kind of film he was making. Saying that, in effect, is actually kind of showing your own ignorance about film history and your understanding of the Western. So if you hear someone say that, you should be like, hey, do you know what Rio Bravo was? And they probably don't. So it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the genre and the format that they're actually making the movie in. I've heard a lot of people say that, and it's fairly obvious they don't understand what they're talking about. The star and the lead of this film is Sam Jackson, who's the first time he's been the headline star of a Tarantino movie, which is interesting since he's most known for being in Tarantino films. And he is just frankly amazing. It's one of his greatest performances. I think he is pretty underappreciated as an amazing character actor for most of the time, but he's probably one of our finest actors in Hollywood right now. He does so much effortlessly that we don't even think about about it, but he gives a Tarantino monologue that is, it's not as good as the Ezekiel speech, but if I was gonna put like his best Tarantino monologues, that would be up there. I just loved that scene and how he performed it. It was so mean and ugly, but the way he says Tarantino's dialogue, it's like no one else could ever say it as beautifully and enunciate it so well. They just work together so perfectly. I can't imagine him not working with Tarantino. He's just such an essential element to his screenplays that I just can't imagine anyone else even saying his dialogue. He's just absolutely perfect. Kurt Russell, who obviously was cast because he was in John Carpenter's The Thing. Kurt Russell is, I think, probably one of the few actors who very much does postmodern performances and understands what exactly he's playing. He's very much doing a John Wayne type role, very similar to what he did in Bone Tomahawk, I guess, but Tarantino has a little more fun with it. Jennifer Jason Leigh, I don't think you don't see enough women get to be as mean and as ugly and as shitty as she is in this film. It's kind of no wonder bigger stars passed on this, because the language she uses in this film is quite extreme, and I don't know if they're ready for it. But Jennifer Jason Leigh really went for it. I don't know if she's really this. To me, Sam Jackson's the standout, but I still think she's great. Everyone, Bruce Dern, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, Damon Bashir, Channing Tatum's basic cameo are all amazing. He has an amazing cast, and he almost cast this like he's a classic Hollywood director as a group of actors he always works with. I mean, he is a director as a group of actors he always works with, but this, it felt very appropriate because of the Western classic Hollywood setting. It's an interesting place to go and to show how ugly humanity can be, and not course correcting history. It's showing like history was kind of fucked up. Tarantino is saying like, no, we can destroy ourselves, we will rip each other apart. There's very little standing between us and just total annihilation of one another, and seeing that done in a Western makes sense because Carpenter himself was so influenced by Western. And this also comes to mind that like Tarantino said that this is his feelings after seeing John Carpenter's The Thing for the first time. And it kind of brings to mind that like how much of a masterpiece John Carpenter's The Thing is. Using that in the Western is interesting because Carpenter always said all his films were basically Westerns and they were very Western influence. And to take Carpenter's influence and turn it into a Western is masterful in terms of how Tarantino understands film and film history and filmmaking and influence. We've just gone through The Force Awakens. We're talking about how Abrams basically just keeps redoing New Hope over and over again. And it's one thing to do that and to be like, okay, this is like New Hope. I mean, he's done it twice with Star Trek and Star Wars. But the reason Tarantino is Tarantino, and the reason Abrams is just kind of a big budget Hollywood filmmaker and pretty much not much else, is that Abrams is just like, I'm taking New Hope and doing it new. And Tarantino's like, well, I'm taking a morality play and I'm saying something about our current society, and I'm taking the John Carpenter influence and I'm taking this TV thing and I'm saying this with this and I'm twisting it to say this thing instead of what it normally does. That is how you use influence, and Tarantino knows how to do that. But I think the way Tarantino does it shows someone who understands the Western. It did feel a little disappointing when I was like, oh, he's doing another Western, but this is such a different school of Westerns. It kind of reminds you how deep and interesting the genre of Western can be and was, and how important it used to be to culture and society in Hollywood. But basically what he's done is he's brought a very talky old Hollywood Western. But what this film is doing is Tarantino is going deep back. He's not doing the 70s shit right now, you know, although he has Morricone and I guess you could say spaghetti Western 60s, 70s or whatever. But what he's doing is going back to the classic Hollywood Western, the big Hollywood kind of film, and they would be talking, and he's using that to say, this is what our society is like now. Much like Oxbow Incident, much like The Searchers. Hateful Eight is a mean, revenge-filled movie that makes you confront a lot of things about American society. Much like how he needed to give us that relief that we killed Hitler, that Hitler was destroyed and exploded. It's anticlimactic that he killed himself in a bunker and nobody knows that much about it or whatever. He gave history something it needed. But in some ways, Hateful Eight is giving history something it also needs, is to be like, we were mean and angry and had a lot of prejudice, and Reconstruction was a really ugly time in American history, and I don't think we've actually ever gotten over it in terms of the ramifications of the Civil War and saying where we are now. I read in, I think, Devin Faraci's review, he said if Django existed, he would have been ripped apart by dogs. And I think that's the culture we live in. You look at all the police abuse, you look at everything that's happening. And that's what a great fucking Western does. That's what a great classic Hollywood Western does, is it makes you think of the time it was made in. And Hateful Eight makes you look at how fucking ugly this time is. I still wonder, are we gonna rip someone apart and then realize we all made a mistake? I think that a lot. We will rip someone apart and it will hurt us in the end because we had so much prejudice and hate, and it didn't matter because we were so ready to hang them. This film really makes you confront a lot lot of things, but I think it makes me think about how pessimistic I am about modern society and amplifies it and makes you see it in a bloody, disgusting, awesome Tarantino way. He's one of the greatest critics in the world because he knows how to say something with these various genres and to show both their faults and how he feels they should be saying it and how they were using it to say certain things. And he's using it to say something about how fucked up and how, riot-filled and how hate-filled and how it's all brimming to the top all this is. And certain films give you faith in humanity and make you feel powerful and make you feel like there is good in this world. This film uses a big Hollywood movie to say maybe the faith in humanity is completely misplaced, because in the end, if you were stuck in a room with 8 people, would you party all the night or would you find ways to kill each other? And I think his way of saying it makes you have a supreme lack of faith in humanity. So if you have seen The Hateful Eight and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.